is haven't available for the Mac user and the Windows, but it's only available for the Linux user. So now we can start off. What is the future of Docker, like a Docker companion? Is it going to be the Rancher? Is it going to be the Podman desktop?
None of those.
Oh, wow.
So I think that the future really is in cloud or remote environments. I think that our laptops will be used more and more as terminals. So companies will have environments. So when you want to compile something, when you want to run something, when you want to do something, you will be doing that in servers. You will not be doing that in your laptop, right? And a good example of that would be, let's say, Gitpod, right? Gitpod, you just say, hey, this is my repository. Create me development environment with the tools I need, with whatever I need, with the ID and so on and so forth. So the future is in none of those things. I think that the future is not in our laptops. The future is in us using laptops to do stuff remotely somewhere else. Now, whether that future will come in 3 months or in 3 years, I'm not sure, but that's where we are definitely going.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the last episode of CloudNative.fm podcast of 2021. And in 2021 is a special year for me. I started this podcast, and the reason behind that, I want to meet these awesome people from the Cloud Native community. And over the year, of course, I've started this podcast in February, and today is December 20 when I'm recording this. I am really this is a wonderful year for me. I am able to talk to some of the wonderful tech industry people in the Cloud Native ecosystem, and that's a really privilege to me. And today I have a special guest for me, and I have booked them very late in December because the topic we're trying to address here is the special topic for Viktor and myself as well. Today we're talking about the cloud native production. What's going to be happen in 2022 in the next year? And I think we try to do this kind of setup every month, like the cloud native ecosystem is very gigantic. We might to do this kind of prediction every month, like what's going to be happen after January to February. But today is thank you very much, Viktor Fosik, for joining me. You work at the company called Upbound, and one of the tools they are building at this moment of time is one of the favorite tool of mine, Crossplane. So thank you, Viktor, for joining me on this episode where we talk about cloud native prediction. So let's introduce yourself to my audience first.
Okay, so yes, thank you for having me to begin with. So yes, I'm Viktor. I work for Upbound. You already heard. I'm very focused now on Crossplane, but I'm always experimenting and then playing and working with many different things out independently of what I work on, who I work for, and things like that. So it's mostly around cloud native. I like to, it's like CSI when you have a cadaver and then you start opening it all around and try to figure out what works, what happens, why it's good, why it's bad, and things like that. So yes. Focused on different tools, different tooling, different processes, and so on and so forth.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm here to tell you today that we don't have I think we have a lot of channel, a lot of the resources as compared to the early existence of Kubernetes. There was nothing there. And I think when I go for the Kubernetes, we don't have a lot of resources in 2017 when I first started in learning about it. Then we got to that, moving forward, most of the people build out their YouTube channel. But I will honestly tell you, your YouTube channel is one of the favorite places for me. Every time I'm stuck in the cloud native tooling, I will go there because you've done a wonderful job explaining these things in a very shortest amount of time. And you explain them in a very trustworthy manner. Like you tell us what it is good at, what it is bad at. That I think might be the company don't dislike this behavior, but for the people like end user, we are really appreciating your effort. So tell us about your first experience of building the YouTube channel and how long it has been for you are doing this stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I had the channel for a couple of years, but I started working on it for real maybe a bit more over a year ago. And I think that the main motivation for the channel, as well as the things I was doing before YouTube, was mostly because to be honest, I'm sick when I go to other sources and you kind of see some review of something or pros and cons, and it always ends up everything is good, kind of. It all depends on what you need and stuff like that. Nobody wants to offend anybody. So you always hear stories about how everything is exceptionally well, everything is great, right? And I wanted to show people what is great, but I wanted really to focus on things that do not work so well, right? So you will hardly find a video on my channel that does not have at least one thing that doesn't work, kind of like, or one thing that I don't like. So it's just as much focused on things that are bad as on things that are good. And I think that that's not happening enough in our industry.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And to be honest, to tell with you, because this YouTube channel is not going, I think for the smaller companies, this YouTube channel and the people like you are doing this kind of stuff, this is a go-to place for a lot of the people. Like most of the people, that is not going to the let's say the tool you're building on the Crossplane IO docs. They go to the YouTube channel to check it, what it is and what it is good at. And if you're providing this information, I think you're making our life really easy. And if you tell us, our people, this is wonderful, you can have to use it. If you don't use it, you're going to die out and your life is going to be so boring. Yes, you can tell it. But at the end of the day, it's hurt people. Like when we're using these kind of technologies, we later down the road and able to understand there is so many flaws in it. And person are asking, this is a wonderful tool, you have to use it. If you don't use it, go leave the cloud native space. This is not the kind of a pitches you try to do. You're doing engineering stuff like this is the tool. You have this kind of problem, go use it. And I like this way of building this out too. And that is alternative for there are few other tools. So appreciation for a lot of appreciation for my side for what you are doing for your YouTube channel. One of my best place for, I think, and audience will tell us during the podcast, what is your go-to place when you got stuck with the cloud native stuff. So today we talk about the cloud native predictions. And Viktor, where should we start from? I think we can start from, if you don't mind, the Docker story of deprecation in 2020 and a Kubernetes version, I think 1.20, and everybody thinking what is happening there. So we can start about Podman or Rancher Desktop or Shipwright, these kind of stories. So we start from the first year, the Docker desktop, Docker is deprecating.
Yeah, I mean, Docker is deprecated in Kubernetes. Now, that's something that, to be honest, I was surprised when people ended up being surprised that is happening. But realistically, I think it was clear that Docker will be deprecated probably like 4 years ago. Docker was, so here's the story. Docker and Kubernetes serve the same purpose. Now, Kubernetes needs something to run containers. It doesn't need Docker because the Docker is doing 57,000 different things, and Kubernetes needs only the fraction of it. It just basically, when Kubernetes uses some container engine, it says, hey, I need something that runs containers. I do not need networking because I'm doing networking. I don't need storage because I'm doing storage. I don't need you to schedule containers. I don't need Swarm. So we never needed Docker in Kubernetes. We just simply because Docker and Kubernetes serve similar purposes. So it was very clear that Docker will be, actually, to be more precise, I think that quite a few years ago, it was very clear that Docker is not a good solution to be a container engine in Kubernetes. The only thing that happened now is that Kubernetes says, now it's gone, now it's deprecated, now you cannot use it. But you shouldn't have been using it for years now. It's just that now you cannot do what you were not supposed to do already. That's the only difference. And the problem is nobody is affected by the removal of Docker except people who were doing things that they were never supposed to do in the first place.
Yes.
So like mounting sockets so that you can communicate with Docker engine running on a node. People should be fired for doing that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's a great place to talk about the cloud native prediction, because when it's going to be happen there, we see a lot of the things that I think people is really shouting word at Docker. They started first up the deprecation of that's Dockershim is actually, it's not, we talk about Docker, but the Kubernetes is, I try to use effective term, because Docker is itself a company, itself is a product. So what is actually deprecating? It's Docker is not deprecating. It's actually Dockershim.
Dockershim, but without Dockershim, Kubernetes has no ways to speak with Docker.
Yes.
Without Dockershim, Kubernetes has no means to tell Docker, hey, I want you to create a container in this node, right? So by effectively deprecating Dockershim in Kubernetes, you're deprecating Docker in Kubernetes. Yes. And that makes a lot of sense, both from the perspective that you should not be running Docker anyway, because it doesn't make sense to run it in Kubernetes. You should be running Docker on your laptop. And if you look at what Docker company is doing, it's very clear that they themselves are focusing on developer experience. They gave up on Kubernetes. So Kubernetes doesn't want Docker, Docker doesn't want Kubernetes. It's a very clear separation. It's a very clear divorce. So now we have, I think it's very clear what is the container engine does not matter for majority of people. You do not care. When you create a Kubernetes in Google, you probably don't even know what's running containers over there. You don't care. It's containerd or is it something else? You don't care. What you care when Docker is concerned is your laptop. You want to run Docker on your laptop, or maybe you don't. That would be a separate story. But and the problem from Kubernetes perspective is that Docker was hard-coded all over the code, Kubernetes code. So it took, Docker would be deprecated a long time ago if it wasn't the amount of effort that was required to deprecate it and replace it with OCI, Open Container Interface, so that Kubernetes speaks with the interface, and it does not care whether that's Docker or, sorry, it cares about Docker, it doesn't care whether it's containerd or something else. Simply, we have a standard interface. Docker does not have that interface, therefore Docker cannot run in Kubernetes.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we can start about these predictions right now, because when you see the Docker is also doing these kind of things like Docker desktop, you paid, I think you have how much dollar of revenue you can pay for the Docker desktop, even for the Docker desktop itself. And then they started about the Docker Hub rate limiting feature and these kind of activities. And then people are really thinking about some alternative to Docker desktop. Mm-hmm. So we see right now that we have a Rancher desktop, and a few days ago, I see the desktop, the Podman desktop is also in the market as well. It's haven't available for the Mac user and the Windows, but it's only available for the Linux user. So now we can start off. What is the future of Docker, like a Docker companion? Is it going to be the Rancher? Is going to be the Podman desktop?
None of those.
Oh, wow.
So I think that the future really is in cloud or remote environments. I think that our laptops will be used more and more as terminals. So companies will have environments. So when you want to compile something, when you want to run something, when you want to do something, you will be doing that in servers. You will not be doing that in your laptop, right? And a good example of that would be, let's say, Gitpod, right? Gitpod, you just say, hey, this is my repository, create me development environment with the tools I need, with whatever I need, with the ID and so on and so forth. So the future is in none of those things. I think that the future is not in our laptops. The future is in us using laptops to do stuff remotely somewhere else. Now, whether that future will come in 3 months or in 3 years, I'm not sure, but that's where we are definitely going. And branch desktop and similar solutions, I see them as temporary solutions, temporary workarounds.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think the remote development is ready. I think few of the companies has built out some tool for the remote development, and I think more popping up. Like if we develop some front end application, like when we install the browser and then browser some dependency. Now we can installing the browser on the browser itself. Like VS Code is available for you in the browser, and you start developing code there. And also the GitHub repository, you just pin out the .period command, I just go to the terminal and just start developing code. So that same thing is going to happen for the containers. So you can develop the containers not locally, but remotely in something else. And that's eventually, I think people is thinking about. So I think we start now for the image building side. I think we have Docker is everything from the desktop to the building to the remote repository. There are so many. So for the building things, I think right now we have more focus around Podman. Then we have Shipwright. That's my favorite one. Build images in Kubernetes. So tell us about for the building images, what is going to be what's going to be happen there?
So I don't think actually much will happen because I think that both of those are more or less solved. And there are two scenarios that you have, right? I'm developing something on my laptop or whatever, and I need to build an image just to test it fast, build an image deploy and stuff like that. For those scenarios, local development, it's going to continue to be Docker desktop or Rancher desktop, nerdctl, Podman, all those are equally good. Now, what is more interesting is what is happening after your development. That's potentially more important part. So I'm talking about, hey, you push some changes to Git repository, some pipelines are triggered, and they will build your image, run some tests. All the automation that we have in place, or we should be having, and that automation today is running in Kubernetes. Doesn't matter whether you're using Jenkins, whether you're using, I don't know, Tekton or Argo workflows, it's happening in Kubernetes. And that means that part of that automation, which is in charge of building images, is happening in Kubernetes as well. And my personal favorite for that is Kaniko. It's been around for a long time, works well. If you combine it with Shipwright, for example, Shipwright is more like a wrapper around different tools. Shipwright is not building itself, but one of the tools that you can use to build with Shipwright would be Kaniko, for example. So use Kaniko, combine it with Shipwright, you have a winning combination. Now, but it's also, those things are eventually, as we mature, as we are doing something more and more and more, things become commodity, things become solved. So right now we are more or less in a phase that it doesn't really matter. There are no real differences whether you build it with Kaniko. You cannot build it with Docker, just to clarify, because Docker cannot run in a container. But whether you use Kaniko, you use Podman, or you use something else, EMG, for example, it's all good. Does not really matter. But if I have to choose, it's Kaniko.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's wonderful. I think Google, I think, is the pioneer of that tool, and we can expect GateString for that tool. I think Kaniko is a wonderful. I think you have a ton of videos available, I believe, on the Kaniko on your YouTube channel.
Yeah. I mean, I have one about Kaniko only, and then quite a few videos where I'm mentioning it.
Yes, absolutely. I will share the link with you. So Kaniko, Shipwright, these are the tools you can look at on the time. So now we're moving down to the registry side of things. That's not going to be very sophisticated topic where to put my images on, but we can draw some points on, because we have so many options available to put the images of the different registry. So what do you think is going to be the leading market going forward when pushing images remotely, like Docker Hub or GCR? We have so many right now.
Yeah, but it also enters into similar category like before, that those things mattered in the past. I don't think that they matter much today. So if you're using cloud, if you're just use whatever your cloud provider is offering. So in Google, that would be something, and in AWS, it would be ECR, and in Azure, ACR. So just use whatever your provider is doing, except in two important scenarios. One is if you're running on-prem, then Harbor is good. Use Harbor over there. If you want enterprise type of support, then probably J4 or Artifactory or something like that. But it doesn't really matter much. Now, the problem is that if you're in multi-cloud, if you're running both in, let's say, Azure and AWS, then you probably don't want to be only in AWS or only in Azure. You probably still want to use those registries in those providers, but you have to set up some kind of mirroring so that images pushed here are also there, because then there is a lower latency by pulling images and things like that. But use whatever your provider. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. They're all good.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think the key takeaway here, if you are using the cloud provider, go use a cloud provider. That's a valid option for you, like Azure, AWS, GCP, or DigitalOcean rather. And now I think before we start some other topic, just few words on Containerd and the nerdctl tool, because I think for over the year, I see the Containerd and nerdctl and tool like this. I think if I'm pronouncing this person's name correctly, really sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Akiru Soda is from I think Japan, is doing a wonderful efforts on building out this tool. So tell us about a few words on what Containerd we all know, but what the nerdctl is doing for developers.
So you can think of nerdctl as being a replacement for Docker CLI, not for Docker altogether, for Docker CLI, right? So whenever you run command Docker this, Docker that, you use nerdctl or nerdcontrol or whatever the name is. So it's a replacement for Docker, which did not have much really, did not have a lot of traction until Docker announced that they're going to charge for Docker Desktop. And I must say here, disclaimer, there is nothing wrong in company asking you to pay something, because we're all engineers. We need to have our salaries as well. But let's say that nerdctl is a very valid and potentially good replacement for Docker CLI. And it is free, it is open source, and it came out of Containerd project. If I'm not mistaken, Containerd folks, and those are the same people that basically, a short history, right? Containerd is what was in the past part of Docker. So Docker is a big thing that does many things, and then part of Docker was taken out and managed as a separate project. That's Containerd, which is now open source, managed independently of Docker and so on and so forth. And nerdctl came as interface, CLI, command line interface to communicate with Containerd. Containerd is what you already most likely have in your Kubernetes clusters, and now we are running Containerd as a engine that runs containers on laptops as well, and that's where nerdctl comes in. It's a Docker CLI replacement.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's brilliant. The only thing that I'm waiting right now is for nerdctl or nerdcontrol and Rancher Desktop to work on my new MacBooks. It doesn't work there yet. Once it does, that will be my preferable combination for local container management.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And about one thing that drives Docker is also the pioneer of tool this called Containerd, and thankfully so I have talked about this topic with Phil Astis, who's a Containerd maintainer. Anybody who's
Exactly.
who are listening to this podcast, go to that link and listen to that podcast as well. So now we have another topic that is one of my favorite, I think, and you have done some videos lately on that. So service mesh. We start with Linkerd, Istio, console. There are so many. So some viewers, what is happening? Because I think service mesh is a very hot topic in 2020. is I think in mid or starting 2021 is a very hot topic. It's a very debatable and a battle going on with the companies about, but is less noisy as we think about. But tell your opinion about serverless.
So basically, service mesh is like Wild West. Nobody knows who's doing what and what's happening and who is killing whom and stuff like that. It's a complete mess still. But there are, if you're adventurous, then you should try 5, 6 of them and see how they work and stuff like that. But if you want kind of a relatively safe bet, we have 2 major players. That's Istio and Linkerd. Istio being one that has more users, bigger support, but it is very, very tightly controlled by Google and a few other companies, right? Linkerd, on the other hand, which is my preference, I prefer Linkerd, and partly I prefer Linkerd because it is in CNCF Foundation, right? So it is managed by independent foundation. It is not owned by any single company, and that makes it very interesting also from both user perspective and vendor perspective. If I would be a software vendor that wants to invest in one of those 2, I would probably go with Linkerd simply because I do not know what will Google do next with Istio. While from user perspective, I really like that Linkerd is based on service mesh interface. So we have relatively standard interface, how you define your resources. And then Linkerd is just one implementation of that. Tomorrow you can choose to remove Linkerd, put something else. And if that something is using the same service mesh interface, then you do not need to rewrite everything that you have. And that's very powerful. I like standardizations. I like when products and companies are adopting some sort of standard interface that applies to monitoring and a few other areas, and in this case, to service mesh. So to me, SMI, or service mesh interface, is the big bonus in favor of Linkerd.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the guys working with the SMIs is Lee Kalkote. I have worked with him previously. So I will mention his link to this is the layer 5 community. So you can join the community next year if you want to interested in SMI or SMB spec. So before we're wrapping up this discussion, one new, I think the news coming up in the market, that is Cilium, the CNI vendors. They're also built out their solution on eBPF based service mesh. I believe you heard about this news. So tell me about just few words on this. Is it a good way of thinking about service mesh without having sidecar, but the complexity or understanding of eBPF?
Potentially, but I don't like commenting on things that I haven't used sufficiently yet. So I haven't used it sufficiently. I haven't played with it, and then I would be guessing. So no comment until I give me a few weeks to dive deeper into it first.
Yes, absolutely. Subscribe to DevOps Toolkit. I hope this video is soon to be coming up. So another topic, I think that's your favorite one, the GitOps. Tell us about Argo CD, Argo rollout, Argo, and so many other things. So tell us about GitOps, so much things happening. Do you think what is missing at this moment and what is going to be coming up in 2022?
So to begin with, I'm really impressed. I think that 2021 was probably the year of GitOps. There was no other subject an area that got such a wide adoption as GitOps. Almost every company I know or work with is in the phase of implementing some of the GitOps tools, right? And it changed drastically how we see software lifecycle, how we see pipelines, and quite a few other things. Now, within the area of GitOps, basically there are only 2 important players. That's Flux and Argo CD, and they're both great. I really cannot. I'm kind of, that's probably the only question where I have no answer, like this is better than that. Both are amazing. Both have very similar features. So you cannot go wrong with either of the two. But now what will be happening, I think, in 2022 is that we will see a serious threat to those tools when trying to manage resources at scale. Because all those tools can easily work with 10 clusters, 100 clusters, 1,000 clusters, but they were not designed for scale. And I think that soon we will see a lot of news coming from Rancher about Rancher Fleet.
Yes.
I think that Rancher Fleet will become a third player in that area with some very interesting and different, not completely different approach, but you can see that Fleet is designed to do what Flux and Argo CD are doing, but at really large scale, kind of like I'm talking hundreds of clusters. So next year will be a year of Rancher Fleet, I think.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I think that's also I'm thinking about at this moment of time, where Rancher Fleet is going. So hope we can see Rancher Fleet a lot in the news when came with the topics. So Rancher Fleet, go check that out. Hopefully this link is available on the chat for the GitHub. So next topic, that is a big one. Knative, serverless. Knative is going to be donated to the CNCF. Thank you very much for finally doing this decision. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now serverless. All about Knative. I think everybody talking about Knative, serverless, but there is so much in Knative. So first Knative and then serverless.
Yeah, but Knative is serverless.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, let me start by saying that there are different ways how you can do serverless, right? You can have functions as a service, you can have containers as a service, and a few others. They're all serverless. Serverless is all about, hey, run this something. I do not care where, I do not care how. That's not my problem. That's your problem. I just want you to run my code. I want you to run up our application. And I think that functions as a service, at least in the current form, are going to prove to be a dead end. I don't think that Lambda is a good solution, and I don't think that other similar solutions are really good because they're very restrictive. Oh, your application needs to be small. Oh, your application needs to be written in this language. Oh, your application needs to be based on this base image. Oh, your application needs to have this interface. And then it takes more time to write the code specific to a functions as a service implementation than your business logic. And on top of that, functions service means that typically, that you need to have one instance per request, which is very limiting. It cannot last more than a certain number of seconds, and so on and so forth. It's functions as service, I think, are pioneers, and most of the pioneers disappear. They're replaced with something else. So I think that most of the serverless solutions will be based on containers. And the only question is whether you run it, whether somebody in your company runs it, or you take a service like from some provider. If you run it, that's Knative, period. There is nothing close or better or whatever than Knative. If you run it yourself, if some SREs or DevOps or whomever is giving it to you as a platform on your own, as your on-prem solution, that's Knative. Now, when we are talking about serverless in cloud, like as a service from AWS, Alibaba, Azure, Google, whomever, then it does not matter that much whether it's Knative or something else. What does matter is that you say, hey, here's my container image, run it. like Google has Google Cloud Run, which is, by my opinion, the best one, my favorite. It's not even running in Kubernetes. It's Knative interface, but it's not really Knative behind the scenes. Azure started with Azure Container Applications, Container Apps, something like that. Yes. And we can see a clear trend that serverless means, here's my image, container image. It's your problem. The only requirement is container image, I think. The only one that doesn't have promising solution yet, I think that's AWS. And I'm pretty sure that in 2022, they will come with a new service that will be closer to what Google Cloud Run is doing and Azure Container Apps. But yes, Google Cloud Run has like at least 1 year, is at least 1 year ahead of the competition.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think Google Cloud Run is also a better one if you compare with Azure Container App. But I think props to Azure folks, because Azure Container App has a wonderful, like, we can think about it, it's far better than Azure Container Instances. We have so much.
Oh yeah. Container instances are like a bad joke, the joke that is not even funny.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So props to Azure fan as well. So now next topic is observability and monitoring. We see Prometheus, Grafana, Thanos monitoring. There's so much. Do we have some other that's recently popping in the market, or do you think any threats to or any other things coming up for the ads compared to Prometheus or the Grafana folks are doing?
So it must be Prometheus. Sorry, let me rephrase that. It must be Prometheus interface, because much of Kubernetes solutions and projects and whatever you're using are assuming that you have Prometheus. You cannot not have Prometheus, simply because many of the things in the cloud native CNCF space, in cloud native space, in Kubernetes, do not work properly without Kubernetes, without Prometheus, simply because Prometheus is everybody's first choice. Now, the important thing to note here is that when I say Prometheus, I mean Prometheus interface. Whether you can have some other solution, you can have from any other vendor a solution, as long as that solution acts and behaves like Prometheus, meaning that it is pulling the data, it expects the same format, and so on and so forth, then it doesn't matter.
Yes, absolutely.
So Prometheus or Prometheus-like something.
Yes, absolutely. And before we wrap up the whole discussion, we're left with two things: CSI, like container storage interfaces, but storage, I think storage market is bombarded by some number of available. But we first think about CNI. CNI, I think Project Calico, Cilium, they are the, I think, leaders at might be this moment of time. Cilium is, I think, they are grabbing the audience attraction a lot. So there is any other you think coming up in 2020 who can compete with these two?
I don't think so. I think that it's those two. And I think it's going to become, I really don't, if I'm running things in cloud, I really don't want to actually think about those things.
Yes.
I think that all those things need to become implementation detail that most of us do not care about. I honestly do not want to care about networking. I do not want to care about storage. I think that all those things are responsibilities of the provider. That's like, you go and say, okay, I want to run my cluster as GK. Excellent. You should not care whether it's Cilium or Calico or something like that. The same way as most of us do not care about hypervisors. You use virtual machines, you like virtual machines, but you don't care about hypervisors. That's implementation detail. I think that we need to get, and I believe that will be the main focus in 2022. The most important thing that we will be seeing is disappearance of those things.
Yes.
Not appearance, disappearing. We will be seeing Kubernetes specific implementation, things like details that are disappearing. I think that even Kubernetes, we will be seeing Kubernetes less and less, not more and more. there will be less and less Kubernetes, because now we are entering into the phase that we are talking about what's running above Kubernetes, not below. Whatever is below, it's same like discussion. Is it containerd or EMG or something else that you're using to run containers? I don't care. I honestly do not care anymore.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's the same. It's the same way of thinking about when we have virtual machines. Like when virtual machines first coming up, everybody talking about how virtual machine actually looks, how we start doing the networking and storage, and how we install operating system on top of it, Fedora or Ubuntu or this. When we move to the next era of the cloud, we even don't think when we purchase a machine from the Azure and then install some, let's say, Ubuntu, we don't even think what's happening going over there. It's a part of the cloud provider job to spun up the virtual machine and install operating system and whatever. I just think about how my app runs over there. So I think that's going to be same happening in the container ecosystem. We talk about a lot container, we talk about a lot Kubernetes. Now it's time to disappear those things and now work on the new innovation, how we try to run our app on top of it. So like we start with the images, registry, we talk about, I think we don't love it any other topic, but that one is my favorite one. That is infrastructure as code. And we all tend to think about, we have Terraform, we have Pulumi, we have another one that is coming up in the market. That is my favorite. And
it happens to be my favorite as well.
And the reason why it's favored for me, because we use infrastructure as a tool to do building up some infrastructure ourselves. But let's say something went down during the process, what should we do? And the Crossplane is actually on the Kubernetes. And you know Kubernetes is how good at zero downtime or auto scaling or auto rollback and rollout. So Viktor, first tell us, what's happening in the 2021 in the infrastructure as code world, and what's going to be happening in 2022?
Yeah, so in 2021, what was happening is that I believe that all the major players in the industry realized that Kubernetes API is the main benefit of Kubernetes, not the fact that it runs containers. Containers are just like beachhead. It's the first thing that we started doing with Kubernetes. And if Kubernetes API is the main advantage of Kubernetes itself, then it makes a lot of sense to use that same API, not only for your front-end applications or whatever you're doing right now, but basically to treat it as the universal API that powers almost everything. And that means, among other things, infrastructure, but also services, applications, and so on and so forth. So what was happening in 2021 is that both Google and AWS and Azure, they all started working internally on a tool that will allow you to manage resources in their own resources through Kubernetes API. And coincidentally, a few years back, Crossplane also started doing that thing, right? Actually, before the providers picked it up. And the whole idea is to bring the same benefits to everything as what Kubernetes brought to applications. And from my perspective, and this might sound offensive, right? What traditional tools in the area of infrastructure are doing is equivalent to SSH for applications, right? In the past, before Kubernetes, we would SSH into a server, and then we do this and that, and our application is running. The same thing is happening in traditional infrastructure types of tools. We have CLI, we execute CLI, CLI reads some manifests, whether that's HCL or it's Go for Pulumi or this or that, doesn't matter, and it does something, and we're finished. What we got with Kubernetes are a few additional things. First, we have an API. Everybody, there are clear benefits of managing things through API, because I can query API, I can consult API, I can instruct API to do something, and so on and so forth. Traditional infrastructure as code tools ignore the fact that there is API. They try to hide the API from the existence. And then we have the other thing about drip detection and reconciliation. When I say I want a VM, for example, that's not what I want to say. Sorry, when I say I want VM, I don't want to say I want you to create a VM for me. And then if that VM stops working tomorrow, then what can you do, right? What I really want to say is to have a contract. I want to say, hey, I want this application running with those parameters forever and ever. I want this infrastructure to be there forever and ever. I want to have, I want to transform, you know, the person that you would have in the past that would sit in front of the monitor and watch it like, and then if something bad happens, then he needs to do something, right?
Yes.
We have operators for that. And now just that it's not a human operator, it's an operator inside of Kubernetes cluster that is constantly monitoring the state of everything and making sure that the state is the correct one. That's one of the benefits of Kubernetes. And now we are extending those benefits to apply not only to containers running in your Kubernetes cluster, but to everything. And that's for Crossplane. That's what we are trying to do with Crossplane. And one of the big differences between what Crossplane is trying to do, which is basically control plane for everything, and what Google and Azure and AWS are trying to do with similar efforts, is that Crossplane tries to be universal. So it's not specific to a vendor. It's not a tool that you can manage only AWS resources, or only a tool that allows you to manage Azure resources, but very vendor agnostic, right? It's open source, it's contributed to CNCF, it runs inside of Kubernetes cluster. Kubernetes is commodity. Everybody has Kubernetes. It's not a problem to have a Kubernetes anymore. And that will be this year. I can bet with you one thing, that by the end of 2022, if you speak with somebody else, somebody who is not working directly with Crossplane, not me, somebody else, they will pick Crossplane as being one of the top 5 tools in 2022. Not
yes.
me, somebody else.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. That is one. That's that. I think, and you receive some fundings from a lot of the vendors as well. I think I see that your tweet and some of the folks on the Crossplane, they have some fundings and these kind of things. In 2021, they receive a good amount of funding to support that tool and these kind of stuff. So around tons of congratulations. And that's a tool, and I try to spend most of the time in 2022. Because that's a missing piece, actually. I love Terraform to build out all the things for me, but what happens, something breaks up during the day. Terraforms don't able to recover to go back to that situation. But the Crossplane is on top of Kubernetes, give you that's Kubernetes feature, actually.
Exactly. And then there is another thing that is extremely important. And that's, and I'm not talking about Crossplane, I'm talking about in general. I think that we will see a even bigger focus in 2022 to shift left, yes. Right? When we're talking about bigger companies, we will see a huge trend towards, hey, the job of DevOps engineers or operations or SREs is not to manage infrastructure, is not to manage your services. It's not to wait until you open a Jira ticket and then you say, hey, can you deploy this application for me? Can you give me a cluster? And then somebody does it for you. I think that the focus will be more and more into people on the right side creating services that everybody else consumes. And that will apply to infrastructure, like with Crossplane, but also other tools that will apply to applications, that will apply to everything. So whichever tool will want to have a success in enterprises, in big companies in 2022, will need to start applying that logic. Will need to be a tool that will enable people in a company to create services for other people in that same company.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So those are the two focuses of Crossplane: drift detection, reconciliation, and we call it composition, enabling people to consume services by creating some wrappers around them.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. At least my focus was is only on the Crossplane at this moment of time itself. So also people like you is part of that Upbound company who is a maker of that too. We expect absolutely great thing for that company as well. So I have a very good feelings about the Crossplane and a lot of stuff happening. So I think we covered at least most of the things. If you think we miss any part, we can dive on that.
I don't know, the thing is that, you know, kind of when you talk about predictions, I think you can talk more about trends,
yes,
than specific tools and tooling, because tools are coming so fast today. Nobody
yes,
can follow. Kind of like, I have no idea what will happen in 2022, and that's what makes it exciting, because it's very exciting to know that so many brilliant ideas are coming all the time that nobody can predict anymore what's going to happen, right?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think in the prediction, I think you have to go back in time to understand what's happening over there, so you can better understand the future as well. So any futuristic people, when they talk about the future, they go back in time to travel a bit. What's happening in this year and what would the trends is going to be happen there. And I think one thing we have to miss at this moment of time, and we will wrap up this discussion, and supply chain security. That's his KubeCon LA 2021 is eventually come up when everybody even talk about it. And I think most of the people is absolutely unfamiliar with supply chain security as I am. So we will end our topic on this. What is supply chain security? How you think of it? Is it mandatory, or what's your things? What's going to be happen in that space?
It is mandatory, and it should be mandatory. It should never be complicated, and I think it's a new name, it's a new term for something that we've been having for many years.
Yes.
And it has a great tendency to miss the point. And the point is that we have security issues, mostly because we have silos in companies, mostly because we have security experts that live in one building and we have developers living on another building. And then after 3 months of development, they come to developers and say, this is bad, this is horrible, this is not secure, right? So really, I think that I think that this really ties back to what I was saying before about shift left. The real changes there will come by enabling security concerned experts in a company to enable developers to do things right. Now, today we call it security something. Yesterday we were calling it something else. It's around the same topic. But one thing that around security, I think that will have to change drastically before we actually start talking about security is how we see the management of life cycle of an application. We still have, I think that first we need to solve that. I think that monolithic pipelines, you know, kind of that says, build this and then run those tests and then security scan this. And I think that will have to change, that will have to be transformed into less monolithic approach, more event-based approach to run things. And then we will come back to all the security related issues as being, as happening not as part of all those pipelines, but being very server-side oriented. I do not really want to run any security scanning or any of those things, neither myself nor in pipelines. I think that we should be leveraging much more than in the past admission controllers in Kubernetes, so that I do not need to do anything. I will be prevented from doing stupid things.
Yes,
that's the key.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think the supply chain security is KubeCon LA, the topic going up, and everybody's talking about it in a very shortest amount of time. The tool called Cosign is everywhere, like in the GitOps action or in the Kyverno or the OPA, like admission controllers. They're all using the Cosign, and I think Cosign is going to be is a tool to be look at.
That's the key. Kubernetes admission controllers,
Yes.
and that's going back to what I was saying before. The key is in Kubernetes API.
Yes.
That's the key component of everything that we are talking or will be talking in 2022. And like it just depends, kind of like in case of security, we're talking about admission controllers and then solutions or whatever. Kyverno, gatekeeper, this or that doesn't really matter.
Yes.
But the key is Kubernetes API.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So thank you very much, Viktor. I really enjoyed the whole conversation with you. I think that's a wonderful conversation. And you booked me, I booked you very last so we can talk about all the things that's happened about the whole 2020 year, 2021. And a lot of the stuff that you put on is really helped me in my 2021 journey in the cloud native ecosystem. So thank you very much. And I hope 2022 is another exciting year for you. And for where you could work at that moment of time, and the tooling you are doing, all of the things I think opening you gain more success out of the 2022. So before I let you go, any thoughts or any tips or tricks you want to share to my audience about having an enjoyable journey with Kubernetes and cloud native stuff?
Don't try kind of like, I think that the thing that makes it enjoyable is if you can manage to have 1 hour a day that you forget everything you know. It's very important when you explore new stuff, new tools, to kind of like clear your mind. You know, usually people try to put it in a box. Hey, you know, I know all this stuff, so what do I do with these new things? How do I put it in? And very often miss the point that a tool or a process is trying to make. So have every day 1 hour of amnesia. I'm going to forget everything I know, and I'm going to spend 1 hour trying to figure out something new.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. At least try a new thing, like whatever or try to share your thoughts in public. That's give you the most wonderful learning experience, because people will give you the insights, but what you think about it is not actually going to be happen. We think about it in a different perspective.
I mean, I don't know how it's been young generations today, but I know that when I was starting with computers, which was too long ago, most of us entered that area because we like to play with stuff. We like to play with technology. We are curious and stuff like that. I don't know how it's today, but at least most of the older people are in this industry precisely because not because of money or this or that, but because we are curious. And it's not a job. It's just that somebody is paying us to do what we like, and what we really like. What majority of people likes, I think, is simply exploring new stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
And building new stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's by learning in public, it's really is everybody try to do. Like they try to share the thoughts, share their opinions, share this kind of stuff, because that's really important, because you work on the same one tool and the rest of the community building out 17 of the different tools. So how do you remember what actually these things are doing? That might be not mandatory for you to understand all those 17 different tools, but you need to know the names of those tools, and you just need to think what they are trying to do and what problem they try to solve.
Exactly.
I think that's really important. So I have a wonderful 1 hour our experience with you, Viktor. Hope you have the same experience that I have mine. And thank you for joining me today. Hopefully I will try to get in touch with you on more of these stuffs, like the tool that have Crossplane and other things happening in the ecosystem. So thank you very much for joining me, and hope to catch up you again in the future. Thanks everyone. Have a wonderful 2022 for you. And if you are working in the cloud native ecosystem or cloud native tooling, Viktor DevOps Toolkit is a channel for you to explore in 2022, or even have you in the radar. Thanks, Viktor. Have a great 2022, everyone.